Hello friends, this is Cindy from Shenandoah Papercraft, and I finished the antique soft spine book that I did part one of last Saturday, and I just finished this today, so I thought I'd give you a flip through. There were things that didn't work out the way I thought they would. This was kind of an experiment with old papers. They did rip like crazy. I pulled out my sewing machine to do some sewing on them and sew the signatures onto the soft spine, and my machine was broken. So I had to do it all by hand with a very, very fine needle and thread. So I sewed those onto the spine by hand, and then I did just cover this loosely. This spine lace is not connected to the spine. The spine was made from the vintage blouse I showed you last week, and I just covered it here because my hand sewing was horrible. For the cover, I had this digital card in the background, which I covered with vintage netting, embroidered netting, and then I had this vintage illustration from early 1900s book, which I cut into an oval and put the pearls around and added just some simple things. This is antique lace going across here and a gold jewelry piece. It's a bouquet of flowers if you can't see that quite well. But that's all I wanted to do because I love the patina of the original book. I sewed the soft spine to the white fabric, and as you can see, it's loose and it will open flat nicely, and it's kind of floating there. And I just sewed these sections. They're not even really signatures. Some are, and some are just some individual pieces. I hand sewed it to the soft spine this way without the sewing machine because I broke it. And let me show you how this looks on the inside. Again, this was the Prince of Abyssinia book, and I just this was the part of the spine piece. I just made it really, really long so I could cover the front inside cover and the back inside cover with it, and sewed it in the middle section like that. And this is the first page inside. This book says it is from 1886. This is a receipt from 1917, and I made this out of a time card. This is an actual photograph. It was dated 1913 in the photo album, and I put on some antique laces. And you open her up, and this illustration was from an old book. This is Tim Holtz, little face here, this little photo here. I'd say this book is 90% true ephemera and 10%, a little bit of Tim Holtz and some scrap paper I had. I did use a scrap of a receipt dated from 1951 and a scrap from an envelope. So I did make use of scraps inside. Again, here's some Tim Holtz, but this is vintage. This is all vintage here. This is an old, I love that sound, the crunchy dictionary page. This is a photograph that was in an album. You can see the paper from the album still. It's a sweet little children and their mother. And on this side, this is tea-dyed paper that I made. This is linen paper, so it's a little sturdier than copy paper. The card itself was made for me in a swap, but I added the vintage lady and the lace, and these are Tim Holtz little things right here. So that's what I added to it. This is from an old magazine from 1890, and it talks about the World Columbian Exposition, which was a celebration of the 400th anniversary of the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus. So this came out of an article from 1890 about that. This is just maybe like I don't know if it was if they call them cigarette cards or trading cards or something, but that's vintage. And here's the envelope, and inside I have this lovely lady. She's a cabinet card, an original cabinet card. This is from one of my vintage books. And here's the other part of that dictionary page. This page has, first of all, when I buy vintage books, sometimes they'll have pressed flowers in the pages. So here is a pressed flower from probably a 1918 book. I just added a tiny bit of vintage lace to hold that flower in place. And inside is this little tiny cabinet card. So that's this lady. Just gonna put them back later. And here's an old postcard. Here's a receipt from June 1917. This is a download from, I believe, Heather at Ruby and Pearl, and I have aged it up. It's an old ledger. On this page, this pocket has two items. One is a gentleman cabinet card, original, and this is my grandfather's. He was Colonel Eugene Grenet. He was an eagle. This is also, this one's my grandfather's name was Eugene, and so is my great-grandfather. This is my great-grandfather's thing. They hailed from, he's from Germany. My great-grandmother is from France/Switzerland area, back and forth there. So this document is half in French and half in German because they all lived very near the border there, 1902. I've gone ahead and inside I've put in this vintage postcard from 1906. And over here I just added some, like a little tag and some vintage trim. And then this is an old check. This was the first chapter of the original book, The Prince of Abyssinia. This is an insurance accounting from the bank from 1941. So there's lots of ledger notations in here. Monterey County Bank, it says. This is from a vintage book, and this chapter was on yachting during Victorian times. So we've got this illustration here at the yachting races, and on the other side there is the ladies watching the men race in the ocean there with their yachts. On this side, I made a side pocket, and I used one of my ladies from a vintage fashion book, and it's got an actual envelope from 1908 from the Wayne Hotel, and the letter's still inside. On this side, it's a flip out of a very long check from 1932. And this is an original photograph. Vintage sheet music. This was from an old art book I had. This is also from my grandfather, Fraternal Order of the Eagles, 1947, his membership credentials. Oh, it's an election for grand officers. And here's a cute little, I think that's a little boy. Kind of cute. This is a little wedding page. Here's an article on a wedding that looks like the 1940s. Very fragile newspaper, so I backed it on some linen paper. And this is from Life magazine from the 1950s, I believe. And I cut it out because it was groomsmen. They went well with my bride. And again, I backed that on paper too because very fragile paper. I'll tell you, I learned a lesson in fragile papers doing this one. This is a vintage flower shop card. She attended the wedding, I'm saying, and brought flowers. This is the other side of that ledger paper. This is a page from the original book. This is one of my favorite photos from the Edwardian times, and I mounted it onto a vintage envelope. I lined the inside of the envelope with French book page from this little French book here, and I put this little cutie pie in there. And it's backed by yet another postcard. Here's the contents page of the original book. And another illustration from a vintage book I had. I just made a pocket page from tea-dyed linen paper, and I stamped the background. This card is from my great-grandfather, and I think it was a gymnastic demonstration kind of a show from 1922. This is from a reprint of a vintage Butterick pattern book. Here's a Tim Holtz paper doll on a vintage French book page. This receipt of agent's record of company material is from 1915. And I added a vintage doily here. Here's a cute little lady sitting on a French book page. The other part of that catalog, 1882. On this page, I made a flip out. And here's some Edwardian ladies on another postcard. This is a piece of the ledger. In the back here, I put this lady, I like her hat, this old photograph. And on this page, it was from a music magazine from 1931. And I tried my hand at making a vintage ID card. I don't think she turned out too bad. And here's the back side of the music magazine. And then the back side of the book. I just put an applique on there and again wrap that lace around the soft spine. Here's the front. And then I made this little tiny book. I just thought it was cute. It's on an old tag, and you open it up. It's an alterations tag, so I put some of the cutouts from that Butterick catalog in here. They fit perfect. And you open it up, and there's some more. Here's a piece of vintage trim, and I just stamped on it a little bit. And that's a little Tim Holtz tag there. And then you turn it over. I made a little pocket with this little girl. And that was my little extra I made. I hope you enjoyed this vintage book flip through. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.